In this video, I will demonstrate how you can synchronize a Microsoft Outlook calendar with a SharePoint Online list. Now, more specifically, I will demonstrate how to create a Power Automate workflow that creates a new item in a SharePoint list whenever a Microsoft Outlook event is scheduled or created. And I'll also demonstrate how you can update the items that have been added to your list whenever an Outlook event is updated, or even when an Outlook event is canceled. Now let's go ahead and let's get started. All right, now the first thing that we need to do is create our SharePoint list. Now you can see here that I'm on my SharePoint site. Next, I'll click on the New button and I'll click on the List option. Next, I'll select Blank List, and then I'll enter a list name and a description. Next, I'll go ahead and click Create. And you can see here that the list was created. Next, we need to add the columns to our list that will be used to store information coming from the Outlook invite. Now we'll start off by adding a start and end date column. Now to do that, you want to click on Add Column and you want to select the date and time type and then click Next. Next, you want to enter a name and a description for your column. And then you want to select this option here that says Include Time. Next, you want to click on More Options and you want to disable this option that says Add to all content types. This will prevent this column from being added across all of your different SharePoint list content types. And then you want to click Save. And you can see here that our column was added. Next, we need to add a column with a multiple lines of text data type to store the contents of the calendar invitation body. Now to do that, you want to click on Add Column, and then you want to select the multiple lines of text type, and then click Next. Next, you want to give your column a name and a description, and then you want to click on the More Options button, and you want to enable this option here that reads Use Enhanced Rich Text. Next, you want to click Save, and you can see here that the event description column was added. All right, next we need to add a column to store the unique identifier for our calendar invites. To do this, you want to click on the Add Column button, and you want to select the single line of text type. Then you want to click Next. Next, you want to give your column a name and a description. Then you want to go ahead and click Save. And you can see here our column was added. Now the last column that we need to add is a link for the actual calendar invitation. Now I will select the hyperlink column here, and then I'll press Next. Next, you want to give your column a name and a description, and then you want to click Save. And you can see here that our calendar event link column was added. Now you can see here that I've entered an item in this list for test purposes. So you can see the title that we will populate with the calendar invite subject. You can see the start date and time and the end date and time. You can see here our multi-line text column called event description. You can see the event identifier, and we'll also be passing in a link to the calendar invite. All right, next we need to create our calendar view. Now to do this, you want to click on the Switch View Options menu and you want to click on Create New View. You want to give your view a name, and then you want to select the calendar view type. Now with the calendar view type, you can choose to display your calendar either in the month layout, the full week layout, the work week layout, or the day layout. Now I will select the month layout as we would like to display all the events taking place in a given month. Next, now what we need to do is map the start and end date to the corresponding start and end date columns that we created in our list. Now I will click into the start date dropdown and I will select our start date time column. And the end date time column has already been set, so we don't need to change this. Next, you want to make this a public view, and this just means that anybody who accesses your SharePoint list will be able to see this view. Next, you want to click on the More Options button, and here you want to select which text-based column will be featured on your calendar events in your SharePoint list. Now, we will be populating our title column with the subject line from our Outlook invite, so I will leave this to the title column. Next, you want to go ahead and click Create. And you can see here that our calendar view has been displayed, and you can see here how the Outlook events will actually show up in our calendar once they're added to the list. All right, next you want to navigate to Microsoft Power Automate. You want to click on the Create menu, and here you want to select the Automated Cloud Flow. Next, you want to give your flow a name. Next, we need to search for our trigger, and we are going to be using the when an event is added, updated, or deleted v3 trigger. So I'll go ahead and select this here, and then I'll click Create. And you can see here that our flow is created. Next, we need to select our calendar. Now you have two different options when it comes to selecting your calendar. You can simply click in the drop-down here, and you can select a calendar that appears. Now, for the purposes of this tutorial, I will just select my Outlook calendar, which is this one right here. Now, before I do that, you can also pass in a calendar ID value. So let's say you want to sync a shared calendar from Outlook. You would need to fetch the calendar ID and then paste that value in here. Now, in order to find the calendar ID, you can actually do that pretty easily using Power Automate. Now, what I've done is I've come into Power Automate and I've created a new instant flow that I can just manually trigger. Now, I'll go ahead and click on New Step. And in the Choose an Operation field, you want to search for the Get Calendar action. You can see here, Get Calendars V2. You want to go ahead and select this. And this action doesn't require any additional information. Now I'll just go ahead and click Save, and I will go ahead and run this by testing it. Next, I'll click Done, and you can see here that the workflow ran. Now, if you click on the Get Calendars action and you click on the Show Raw Outputs, and what this will do is this will display a list of the calendars that you have access to. Now, if I scroll down, you can see here, I have access to a shared calendar called Recruitment Calendar. And you can see just above the name field is an ID field. So this is the field that you would pass in if you want to use the calendar ID for your workflow trigger. All right, now the next thing that we need to do is initialize a variable. To do this, you want to click on New Step, and you want to search for variable in the Choose an Operation field. Next, you want to select Initialize Variable. You want to give this variable a name. Now you can see I've called this variable TerminateLookUp, and you want to set this variable to the Boolean type, and you want to set the initial value to false. And it's important to know that false should be lowercase. Now we are going to use this variable to terminate a loop later in the workflow when we need to determine if a calendar invite already exists in our SharePoint list. All right, next what we'll do is add a switch control to our workflow. Now to do this, click on New Step and search for Switch in the Choose an Operation field, and then select the switch control. Now what a switch control does is it allows you to build out multiple paths through your workflow that will execute only if certain conditions are met. Now, the next thing that we need to do with our switch control is we need to specify what value we are switching on. Now, to do this, you want to place your cursor in the Choose a Value field. That is going to bring up the dynamic content pane. And what you want to do is select the action type attribute that is coming from the when an event is added, updated, or deleted trigger. Now, if I hover my cursor over the action, you can see here the tooltip that reads the action type of the event can either be added, updated, or deleted. Now I'll go ahead and select this. Now next we need to build out our case blocks. Now our case blocks are the actual paths through the workflow. Now by default, when we added our switch control, one case block was added. Now in the equals field, what you want to do is enter the value added. And as I go through the tutorial, I will rename these case blocks to just make it explicitly clear. Now to do that, you want to click on the menu for case and click rename. Now you can see here, I've called this case block case 1 when a new event is created. Next, I'll click on the add case button, and that will add a second case block to our workflow. Now you can see here, I've updated the second case block, and in the equals field, I've entered the value updated. And you can see here, I've also added my third case block, and in the equals field, I've entered the word deleted. All right, next we're going to build out the first case block, which is the when a new event is created block. Now I'll start off by clicking the add an action button, and in the choose an operation field, I am going to search for the SharePoint action create item, and then I will go ahead and select this action right here. Next, I'll select the site address and list name. And you can see here, as soon as I select the list name, the create item action card expands and it displays the fields that exist in our SharePoint list. Now, next, what we're going to do is we are going to map fields from our Outlook event to the corresponding column in our SharePoint list. Now, I'll start off with the title field, and I will place my cursor in the title field, and you can see here it brings up the dynamic content pane. Now I want the subject from my Outlook invite to pass into the title field, so I will select subject. Next, we'll map the start and end date and time columns to the start time and end time with the time zone. Now you can see here I've populated those fields. Next, we will map the event description to the actual content of the invite body. So I will select this body attribute. And next, we need to map the event identifier. Now, this is really important because we want to ensure that we capture the unique identifier for the Outlook invite that triggers this workflow, because when we build out the other case blocks, we're going to use that identifier to look up items that were added to our list. Now I'll place my cursor in the field here, and what I will do is I will search for the ID attribute, and you can see here it says the event's unique identifier, and I've gone ahead and I've selected that. Last, we are going to map the calendar event link to the actual web link, and you will note that this is the URL to open the event in the Outlook web app. Next, I'll go ahead and save my workflow. Next, we'll go ahead and we will test this. All right, now you can see here that I have created an Outlook event. Next, I'll go ahead and click send. You can see here that the flow ran successfully. Now I'll click on the switch action to expand this. And you can see here that the switch condition evaluated to added. And as a result, our first case block when a new event is created, executed. And if I expand this here, we can actually see the attributes that were passed in to our SharePoint list from the Outlook event. And I've brought up my list here, and you can see that the item was added, and I'll just edit the item here. And you can see the title, the start and end date and time. You can see here the description. You can see here the unique identifier, and you can also see the calendar event link. All right, next we're going to build out our second case block. Now, the first thing that you want to do is click on add an action. And in the choose an operation field, you want to search for the SharePoint get items action. You want to go ahead and select this action here. Next, you want to populate the site address and list name field. Next, you want to click on the add an action button. And in the choose an operation field, you want to search for the apply to each action. Next, you want to select this action here. And in the select an output from previous steps field, you want to select the value attribute from the get items action. Next, you want to click on add an action in the apply to each action. And in the choose an operation field, you want to search for the condition control. And you want to select this action here. And next, you want to place your cursor in the choose a value field. And here you want to select the variable that we initialized earlier in the tutorial. Next, you want to place your cursor in the choose a value field here. And here you want to type in the value false. Next, you want to click on add an action inside the if yes block. And here you want to search for the condition control once more. You want to go ahead and select it. Next, you want to place your cursor in the choose a value field. And next you want to select the event identifier column that is coming from our get items action. Next, you want to place your cursor in the choose a value field. And this time you want to select the ID field that is coming from the when an event is added, updated, or deleted trigger. Now I'll go ahead and select this option here. Next, you want to click on the add an action button inside this if yes block. And here you want to search for the update item SharePoint action. You want to go ahead and select it. Next, you want to populate your site address and list name. And next, you want to place your cursor in the ID field, and you want to select the ID value from the get items action. Next, you want to map each of our SharePoint list columns to the corresponding fields coming from the trigger when an event is added, updated, or deleted. Now I'll demonstrate this for one column, and then I'll just go ahead and populate the rest of these. So I will click into our title column, and I will scroll down to the very bottom of the dynamic content pane. I will make sure that I am selecting values from the when an event is added, updated, or deleted trigger. And in this case, I am going to pass in the subject into my title column, and then I will go ahead and populate the rest of my columns. Next, you want to click on the add an action button inside the if yes block once more. And in the choose an operation field, you want to search for the set variable action. Next, you want to select the action, and in the name field, you want to select the TerminateLookUp variable that we initialized earlier. And in the value field, you want to set this to true. Next, you want to save your workflow, and you can see here that the workflow was saved. Now, before we go ahead and test this, we'll just step through this case block. So whenever an Outlook event is updated, this case block will execute. And what it's going to do is it will fetch all of the items from your SharePoint list. Next, it's going to loop through each of those items. And the first thing it's going to do is for each item in your list, it will check to make sure that our TerminateLookUp variable is false. If it's false, it will then come into this if yes block where it is going to take the current item that is being examined in your loop and compare the value stored in the event identifier column in our list to that of the ID that triggered the workflow instance. If it is a match, then it will come down to the second if yes block, and it will go ahead and update the SharePoint list item with the details coming from the Outlook event that triggered the workflow. And then it's going to set this variable to true so that up here, it will automatically fail and just proceed through the rest of the SharePoint list items until the workflow instance terminates. All right, next we'll go ahead and test the workflow. Now you can see here the Outlook event that we created earlier in the tutorial. I'm going to go ahead and change the name of this event. I'm also going to change the date, and I will also change the subject. Next, I'll go ahead and click send. You can see here that the flow ran successfully. Now I'll click on the switch block. You can see here that the second case block executed. You can see here that the get items action executed. And if I click into the apply to each action and I click on these conditions here, you can see that the first item passed the TerminateLookUp is false condition. And if I click on the second condition here, you can see that the event identifier for the first item did not match, and so it did not update. And if I move this to the next item here, you can see that the event ID column matched the event ID from the Outlook event that triggered this workflow, and therefore the item was updated. You can see here that I've brought up our list, and you can see that that item has also updated, the updated title, the updated date and time, as well as the updated description. And if I switch into our calendar view, you can see here that the item will display on the calendar view as well. All right, now you can see here that I've built out the third case block, and the third case block, when an existing event is deleted, is identical to the second case block with one minor difference. Now that difference is that when we get down into the second condition here, instead of updating items here in the if yes block, what we're going to do is we are going to use the delete item action to delete that item. Now, I've populated my site and list name. Next, I'll place my cursor in the ID field, and I will go ahead and select the ID value from the second get items action that we are using up here. All right, now I'll go ahead and test this workflow, and you can see here that I have brought up that Outlook event that we just updated. Now I'll go ahead and click cancel, and I will click send. You can see here that the flow ran successfully. You can see here that the third case block executed. If I click on the apply to each action and I expand the condition here, you can see here as I expand the workflow that as it went through the list items, the first item did not match the event identifier values, so it skipped this. And if I move to the next item in our list, you can see here that a match was found and that the delete item action executed. Now you can see here I've brought up the SharePoint list, and that second item is no longer displayed. And if I switch into the calendar view again, it has been removed from this view as well. So that's it. In this video, I demonstrated how you can synchronize a Microsoft Outlook calendar with a SharePoint online list. If you found this video helpful, be sure to give it a like. Be sure to share it, and most importantly, be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss out on any of my new tutorials. I'm Louis Yacobelis. Thanks for stopping by. Talk soon.